believe in God.
Every description of God that I've heard holds God to be all-powerful, very typical, and all good. And I see earthquakes and tornadoes and disease, childhood leukemia, and I see all of this and I say, I do not see evidence of both of those being true simultaneously. If there is a God, the God is either not all-powerful or not all good.
It's some very powerful words from Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of my, I guess, most recent heroes. Love what he has to say. G'day and welcome to episode 4. Beyond Belief, Making the Invisible Visible is what we call this in 2023. I've changed the name in 2024 to An Atheist, a Believer and a Pastor Walk into a Bar. My daughter came up with that. I think it's a fascinating intro. My name is Peter Rowe. Happy New Year to you. We are broadcasting live from Perth, Western Australia. It's 8 p.m. or just after Australia Western Standard Time on Wednesday, the 3rd of January, 2024 on YouTube. Now, but you may be watching a replay or you may be watching live. Either way, it's great to have you tuned in. Thank you so much for your time. If you are watching 8 o'clock on the 3rd of January, you have the opportunity to ask a question or make a comment. Join in. Tell us what you really think. It's all about you, and we're talking about a belief in God. It's a fairly broad brush that I've used there, but we shall delve deeper as we go on. I used to believe, up until about 11 years ago, being a Christian for 25 years, and then I got to understand that it just wasn't real for me anymore. So if you want to know more about what happened, you may be going through a similar situation, I'm happy to answer any questions. Jump onto YouTube live tonight. And we can do that. Richard Stalls, our regular guest, of course, is with me tonight, and a very special guest, Suresh Rajan. Welcome, gentlemen, to you both.
Good to be here. Good, Pete. Good to meet you.
Fantastic. Yeah. Looking forward to tonight.
Absolutely. It's going to be fabulous. Suresh is very well known to many people across Australia, particularly here in Perth, and we're very lucky to have him with us. Suresh is the president of the Ethnic Communities Council of Western Australia, also an ambassador for people with disabilities, and is the former president of the National Ethnic Disabilities Alliance. You might know, if you've been watching the news lately in Western Australia or recently, he helped a family of 7-year-old Ashwarya Aswath, who died in 2022 from sepsis amid claims that there were serious systemic failures within WA's health system. He's a good man to have on your side. You don't want to cross him, that's for sure. He's also fairly outspoken when it comes to belief. Like me, he's an atheist. So, Suresh, fantastic to have you with us tonight. Happy New Year to both of you, gentlemen. Tonight we want to talk about what I like to call geographical convenience. Before we get more into that and what that means, Suresh has a fascinating history from when he was born to right up to now living in Australia and the countries in between. So, Suresh, maybe you can just talk about the experience you talked to me about a few weeks ago, which is when we decided to then have a chat on this particular podcast, and where you were born and what you experienced as a young man, which brought you to the place of being an atheist now.
Yeah, it's quite a fascinating journey. I was born in Singapore in December 1959, and soon thereafter we left Singapore to go to Brunei, and grew up in Brunei for the first 10 years of my life. Now, Brunei at that stage was just coming out of being a British protectorate, was very much a white supremacist place where basically the English had been there and exploiting the oil wealth of the Bruneian people, who really relied on that for all of their revenue. They had no taxation and no goods and services taxes, no customs duties. Everything was completely duty-free port, and it was a great place to grow up. My dad was a school teacher, the first person of non-English descent to be appointed a deputy principal at one of the schools in Brunei. Quite an achievement on his part. Came from years of experience, etc. So I grew up in what was coming out of I suppose a Christian or Church of England place that was slowly evolving into an Islamic state, where the Sultan was always the predominant ruler, but he had distanced himself from the British Commonwealth and largely become a very independent state. And so we went through a period of childhood, being born to Hindu parents and growing up as a Hindu, relatively devout Hindu mother, a father who was questioning of beliefs generally, but became a very devout Hindu later in his life when he was affected by cancer and other terminal illnesses, at which point he suddenly reverted to religion, which is quite an interesting experience for us to witness as well. But so we grew up in a Hindu household, an Islamic state, and only ever went to Catholic and Anglican schools in Brunei.
Wow.
At age 10, yeah, it was quite a fascinating exposure to these different religions. Always came first in my Bible studies classes, I must say. It did, when I look back on that now, and I think, how did I even manage to get through Bible studies classes? But I did, and did very well in them. Then at age 10, Dad decided that we needed to learn something about our own culture and sent us to boarding school in India, my brother, my sister, myself. Went to boarding school, so I went at the age of 10. And again, it was to an Anglican school this time, but in a Hindu fundamentalist country, which was also a very secular country at that time, and significant influences by Muslim communities, Catholic communities. The region where I was staying had the oldest Jewish synagogue in India that had been established in 1492.
Wow.
So there was fascinating history. Dad grew up in a village in southern India, which was in a Hindu fundamentalist country. He grew up amongst a very large Muslim population. So again, his influences were Muslim, Hindu, and a whole series of other religions that sort of impacted on him. Age 12, which brings me to the issue that we talked about the other day, Peter, that age 12, I was in boarding school in India. One of the requirements of students at that boarding school was that we played sport every day. And we played for an hour and a half. And that particular season, it was hockey. So my best friend and I had played hockey, and we came back to the dormitories after the game, 12-year-old, and as any 12-year-old would do in a dormitory, in a shower area, shower recess of the dormitory, you jump up onto you grab hold of the shower rails and you do chin-ups there. And as my friend went for the fourth chin-up, he suddenly burst his jugular and dropped at my feet dead. And that set off this whole train of thinking around my whole psyche. Just went into this space of, I need to understand why, if there is a God, they would take away someone who is so innocent and so pure as this person is, because I could see that my best friend could do no wrong to anyone. Why would he be taken away from me, from his parents? And that just got me thinking about, no, I cannot accept that there is a God, as Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying earlier, a God that is supposedly omnipresent, omnipotent, and also good and just. Why would they take away this human being from me? And that got me on the path of really questioning every aspect of religion, every aspect of every religion. Again, having had exposure to Islam, having had exposure to Anglicanism, Catholicism, Hinduism, and the general, and in India, a whole series of godmen and all of those things. It really got me thinking about every aspect of every religion. And I decided that there wasn't anything in any of those religions that connected with me. It was an interesting decision to make at the age of 12, and I'm now 64, and I still maintain that position of saying I cannot believe that there can be a higher being who is all good, all beautiful, all just, etc. If there are diseases, if there are young people dying, if there are people dying without any control over what happens to them, and all of those things just got me thinking. So that I've remained ever since then. And then after that, I came to Australia, which at that stage was far more of a Christian society than it is today. Back then, it was about 73% of the population followed Christianity. Today, it's about 43.9% of the population follows Christianity, and non-Christians are the big group at the moment. So it's exposure to all of those religions, exposure to some of the extreme aspects of every religion, and I've seen it all in India. Killings on the basis of religion, torture, harm, all of that are in the name of religion. And that's got me to that position where I've just decided that I don't wish to have any part of any religion that requires me to smite someone else or impact on someone else.
Interesting. One of the things that stood out to me that you're talking then, Suresh, is how you excelled at Bible study. I'm just wondering at any time between that age and your age now, whether you, one, look back and reflected on the Bible having any truth in your mind about it, or two, how you managed to reconcile your atheism to a young man who obviously understood the Bible and was passionate about it to the point where you excelled. How does that marry up for you?
I regard myself as very much an atheist, but definitely not an anti-theist. I believe that everyone, and I spend a lot of my time arguing for the rights of diverse religious adherents to actually practice their religion. So spend a lot of time trying to integrate people of Islamic faith, people of Jewish faith, people of Hindu faith into this country, and to make sure that they're all allowed to do so. So I actually distinguish very firmly and very clearly between what I would regard as religious rights and what I would regard as human rights. And that human right, to me, is not clouded by the religion that people follow, unfortunately. And I think you might have seen a post that I put on Facebook the other day where I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if every person who was an adherent to one religion or the other actually spent time practicing the tenets of their religion, rather than trying to tell every other religion that theirs is the best. Leave aside the proselytizing, leave aside all of that, leave aside the competition for disciples. Let us just work towards saying all of those religious rights that are contained in all of the various texts, and I've read all of them. I've read all of the Buddhist texts and all of the Islamic texts and the most of the versions of the Bible, and some of the Hindu texts as well. And I've really looked at the basic principles and understood that I don't see a lot of difference between what are prescribed and almost dictated to by religion as fundamental human rights. So why do I need to have a religious overlay if I can simply practice the whole adherence to human rights? I don't need to have a religious overlay on top of that, because I am effectively practicing a religion if I am because all of those religious rights are contained in the human rights that we also dictate and we adhere to and hold as fundamental to our being.
Yeah, yeah, I don't disagree with anything. Richard, have you got anything you want to chuck in at this
Yeah,
stage?
no, I find that piece fascinating. It reflects a bit of the conversations we've had
Mm.
in some of the previous ones, and I do like your distinction of atheism versus anti-theism in the
Mm.
sense of in the sense that you've elevated the person above the belief system, which is, I mean, if we can do that, I think we'll put to bed a lot of the battles that we have in that. And with our other regular Luke and I, outside of this podcast, we have similar conversations about the interaction of like a philosophical understanding of God, and then the practice of religion and the practice of belief and how these all interact. And I think when we conflate everything into a real flat, almost let's see, like everything just is it's a yes or no, and then if it's a yes, we have to fight for the yes, and if it's a no, you're our enemy. That kind of real flattening out of belief into a them versus us proposition is so damaging. So I really like that distinction that you made.
And Richard, it's quite a one of the most compelling conversations I ever had was, and you'll find the juxtaposition of these two religions quite fascinating. There was an Anglican archbishop in Perth who actually came from Sri Lanka and was probably a better a better scholar of Buddhism than any Buddhist I knew. And he was fascinating. And in fact, if you want to know the most about Buddhism, you go and talk to the Archbishop of Canterbury. He's brilliant on that subject of Buddhism. But this particular person, Richard Hurft, actually said to me, Archbishop Hurft said to me, look, you've got to realize, in Sri Lanka, there are all these people who are Buddhist, but Buddha never regarded himself as a god. So what we've done as human beings is elevate another human being to a position of God, when in actual fact, what that human being in that particular case wanted was the preservation of human rights and the preservation of human life and the dignity of humanity. And that's why I struggle with the concept of religion as this formulaic set of rules that we have to live by. Hinduism has far more attraction for me than some of the Christian texts, simply because Hinduism does not prescribe that you need to go to church X number of times or go to a temple X number of times, or you have to say X number of Hail Marys or whatever. You do not drink or you do not smoke, etc. None of that's prescribed in Hinduism. Hinduism simply says, do the right thing by your fellow human being, and you will come back in a higher form in your next incarnation. Which is why in the 60s, Hinduism became very attractive to people like the Beatles and all of those people from Western cultures who suddenly invaded India searching for enlightenment. And when you think about it, Buddhism is just an offshoot of Hinduism anyway. Buddha was originally a Hindu before he became a Buddhist and created his own religion. So I guess I keep coming back to this thing of, if the Hindu philosophy is about doing the right thing and therefore being recognized for doing the right thing, then I can do that without having to read a book or to sing certain songs and do that. But I come back to that point again, Richard, that I'm not anti-theist. I will fight to the death the right of every person to practice their religion as they wish, but it is just not for me.
Yes, very passionate man. I can't say I am 100% with you on not being an anti. I wouldn't call myself an anti-theist. I actually don't like labels and names at all. I much prefer to explain to people that my stance is simply I'm open to evidence. I'm open to there being evidence of there being a God. All of the other stuff that you're talking about, 100%. 100%. We've talked about this earlier on. I think might have even been our first podcast. And we all agreed that the simple philosophy in life is don't be a dick. If you adhere to that, you've done that's Hinduism, it's Buddhism, it's all of the religions tied into one. Except I think with Christianity, falls flat on its face by introducing 10 commandments, which are, fairly superfluous, I think, in many ways. But yeah, look, it's it's interesting. I just wanted to mention too before we move on, guys, for those if you are watching live right now on YouTube, love to hear from you. If you've got a question, you've got 6 ears here who are willing to listen and hopefully be able to offer you something of an answer. If not, we're quite happy to just chat among ourselves and hopefully that you can find that enjoyable. The cornerstone of what we are talking about tonight, which I think is absolutely fascinating, of course, is the argument about the convenience of your geographical placement on this earth. That to me is a game changer. And I think it's worthwhile each of us putting our 2 bobs worth in what it means. I find I can't get past the fact that aren't we lucky to live in Australia and where we can worship Jesus? How good is that? Because according to if you're a full-on Christian and you believe in the Son of God and you were repented and you've been promised eternal life, is it fair to say from that people who are born in Delhi in India potentially, if Christianity is correct, are they going to hell? Is that basically the bottom line, Richard? What's your stance on that?
So you've asked me the real hard question right out the gate, haven't you?
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, you're not going to get the best, let's say, fundamentalist Christian answer here. I could give it. There are, let me channel the more fundamentalist answer for a moment. This is not my view, but there is the view that says, really hardcore is, it's tough. You should have listened to the missionary. You should have listened to the dream. You should have listened to the impulse of your heart. And if you did, you would have found your way there, and you didn't, so burn. I've never found that a compelling answer anywhere along my journey in Christianity. I guess as a young person, you just go, well, I don't know enough. So you just sort of push that into the background, hoping that as you learn more, somehow that will get cleared up. But then you sort of travel towards some other sort of Christian ideas of annihilationism, where, well, it's not hell, but you just sort of stop to exist, and only those ones who happen to be born in Australia or Europe or happen to have a missionary come their way get to keep on existing. I never found that compelling either, because it didn't seem like that much of a better answer. I guess for me, the thing that really is, it drives me is when we talk about faith isn't like, as opposed to reason. For me, faith and reason are the same kind of thing, in the sense of a push towards truth. If you're talking about faith as a way of being and living and maybe reaching toward the divine, then you start getting into the religious territory. But for me, and we've talked about this, trying to follow the evidence and the reason to wherever it leads. And I'm fortunate I don't get paid by a church. My livelihood doesn't depend on me having to believe a certain thing. So I'm actually a lot free to explore that. But my sort of the way I'm thinking at the moment is what they call, for if you want a label for it, because it does help to sort of go, oh, okay, that's the sort of things you're talking about, is what's tended to get talked about as patristic. What is the term? Universal reconciliation. It's a doctrine that was right there in the beginning of the church that sort of fell out of favor when, especially as the convenience of having a hellfire and brimstone sort of stick to keep everybody in the empire corralled in the right direction. But back then there was a significant amount of philosophy, theology around the idea that the end point of humanity was reconciliation with God in some way. So personally, I don't have a view of a eternal conscious hell. Hell is an eternal conscious torture chamber, which puts me in the minority of Christians today, but certainly not outside of Christian orthodoxy, even though many of my colleagues and friends would want to call me the big naughty H word, the heretic, but no, they're wrong. I'm right, they're wrong, so it's okay. I still love them. So I do see that's a big problem. Like if you're born in India, you've got a loaded set of dice against you from becoming a Christian. And if you see the end, at the end of your life, if you haven't said the prayer or whatever you want to call it, you end up in a hell forever. That's a pretty well. Let's just call it what it is: a morally abominable sort of way of viewing reality, isn't it? So that's a long way of saying I don't actually hold to a hell for eternal consciousness.
No, I mean to just drag you back from your soapbox for a minute.
Thank you.
I'm talking about a base level, which I think it may be very difficult for Christian people to actually envisage what it is for me, it's the end of the story of there being a God and Jesus and the whole bit, simply based upon that it doesn't work because geography plays such an enormous part in this. It just simply is totally illogical for me to think that you're just lucky you got the right God. All of the gods in the world, you're an atheist toward. There's only one that you accept and believe as being real. You're atheistic towards all other belief systems, all other deities. How can it be, Richard? How can you reconcile yourself to the fact that you're only a Christian because you're born in Australia? Does that not suddenly make you stop and sit up and go, hang on a minute, that is the reason 100% that I am a Christian initially in its origins? Because you have to be able to reconcile yourself to a God that you think is the God. There's two claims, isn't there? There's Islam and Christianity that claim that, this is the deal. This is the one. You've got it. How can it be that you just happen to be in Australia? And I'm talking about myself because I was a Christian for 25 years and I never considered that to be relevant or important in the slightest. It had nothing to do. I'm just here. And then I sat back and I thought, hang on a minute, this is crazy. I'm a Christian because of where I'm born, not for any other reason initially.
Yeah. So the less more controversial answer for me, but less for this group, is that I agree 100% with that summation that your religion is pretty much a result of your circumstances of birth, growing up, who was around you. I mean, there's plenty of Christians in India as far as numbers go, but relatively small. And the ones who just happen to have encountered a Western missionary or the son or daughter of a Western missionary, spiritually speaking. So that is you can't get around that. It's absolutely how it is. But for me, I would separate myself from the kind of Christianity that would say that the God of Christianity is different from the God of Islam, is different from the God of you name it. There's, I am a theist, I'm a Christian, so I say there is God, but there's only God. So there's not more than one God. By definition, there is only one. It's the unity of being. It's the being beyond being, however you want to call it. Many of the even Eastern religious traditions speak in similar ways. So I wouldn't say my God's real and let's not pick on Islam, but an Eastern religion who certain forms of Buddhism, that your God or your concept of the eternal, all-encompassing God is wrong or not real. I would say they actually both speak of the same thing in different ways, as far as a concept. So God as it is one. So when I speak about God, I'm speaking about the same thing. So that side of things, is different. But we start speaking it through the lens of religion, and we start using different words and different concepts and different forms. And yes, we start speaking about differences there. But at that very outer layer, I would say there's only one. It would be definitionally inconceivable to say my God is right and your God is wrong if there's only one thing called God. You know what I mean? So I don't play that game, which a lot of Christians do. And for those who do that, I'd say they're wrong. They're speaking at a very parochial, privileged position when they start speaking that way.
Can I just give you one, just talking about some of those issues here, both of you all have addressed there in terms of that geographic connection to a particular religion. Let me just tell you a story of what's happened to me. What happened to me some years ago. There was a doctor here in Perth who is was
Wi-Fi
grew up in Malaysia and was a very devout Hindu at that time. And at the time, I remember, he was a practicing Hindu and very much into all of the religious aspects of Hinduism. He got married to a Catholic and converted to Catholicism and actually became a special minister in the church. His son at the time worked for me in a financial planning practice that I ran. And one day, the doctor rang me and asked me if I would call by at his home. So remember that he's grown up in Malaysia, grown up a Hindu, converted to Catholicism, and become a special minister in the Catholic Church. Now, he asked me, that was a Friday night, he spoke to me, he said, look, if something happens to me, I need you to make sure that my son continues to work for you. I need you to make sure that my wife buys a new car, and a whole series of things. And I said to him, why are you telling me these things? I just don't understand this. And he said, look, I have to go for a heart procedure on Monday, and I don't think I'll survive. Here's a doctor. He knows medical stuff. So he's probably going to be, he's on the right track there. So anyway, Saturday morning, he rings me again and says, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you, I need you to make sure that my granddaughter studies Spanish. She continues her swimming classes. Now I'm terribly agitated. I made the decision, when I get into work on Monday morning, I'm going to call his son into my office and tell him, you need to go and talk to Dad. There's something wrong. Dad's not quite with it. And Dad, the son was the same age as I was anyway. Monday morning, I've walked into the office and the phone's rung, and it's the police. He's walked into a petrol station in Belmont here, doused himself with fuel, dropped a match on himself, and he's up in flames at the Bowser. and he's got my card in his hands saying Suresh knows all about this, the ambers and fireys that are coming in. He survived 1 week and then died because all they were doing was changing his dressings 6 times a day. He never regained consciousness. But what it showed me was the hold of religion on him, on his psyche. In Hinduism, the fire is used as a cleansing mechanism in almost all of our rituals. When you have someone who dies, usually the surviving widow is thrown on the funeral pyre together so that she will be killed as well. And it was all those things that were done. It's not done these days, but it was done in the early days of Hinduism. He's gone from being the special minister, knowing full well that he is not to cremate himself under the Catholic traditions, etc. He's gone back to his base religion, which was decided for him on a geographical aspect. He grew up in Malaysia. He went to temples. He lived in a Hindu environment. And all of a sudden, anything after that point did not sit well with him because he reverted back to that. And he left notes for all of us, for myself and for his nurse, to say, I know that cremation's not allowed. I need you to talk to my priest to explain what the Hindu philosophies are, and I want you to do that. Just think in terms of that whole hold of religion, hold of traditions, and the geography that determines your space in life, if you like. It fits in exactly with what you guys are saying.
Wow.
That geography determines where you're going to end up in a religious environment.
Can you think of any situations where that can be positive? That's an amazing story and a very sad one. But is there a situation you can think of where the geographical reality of someone's situation actually proved to be not, life or death or religion or not or whatever, but just just wondering.
And Buddhism provides that. In Sri Lanka, abject poverty, an environment that was based on a whole lot of revolutions between the Tamils and the Sinhalese, and all of a sudden you have this religious, what was supposedly not a god, who was providing enlightenment to all of these people, who actually found a means of escapism from the reality of wars, and it allowed them to do their normal living because there was this higher being that they were aspiring to follow, and that meant that they were taken away from the revolutions that were religiously based, the fights over aspects of whether my religion's better than yours, etc. But it became very much a case of it really was a means of escapism from the reality of war, the reality of poverty, and it gave them almost a huge amount of solace because it really provided them this real means of escapism. India used Hinduism in similar fashion, subsequently to be replaced by Bollywood, which provided the same level of escapism and took them away from the realities. But that can be one of the positive aspects of that adherence to a religious, to take you away from the mundane and take you away from the petty and from the arguments when you've got something else to aspire to and something else to actually have a faith in. And coming back to Richard's point about faith versus religion, and let's not talk about one faith being better than the other. We're just talking about faith in general. So that faith can deal with it. You don't need the religious structures and strictures, but if you have the faith, you can have that taking you away from the mundane to a space where, almost nirvana and acceptance.
Which
Yeah.
brings me to a question I would like to. Just sorry, Richard. Just let
No,
me.
that's great. Go.
It brings me to a question I'd like to ask, and this is something that we've talked about before, and it was Hitchens. And I want to ask our audience, is there something that you can do as a Christian that I can't as an atheist? And Hitchens had a fair amount of money to give away to someone who could come up with that, and he went to his grave still with what we believe was a fairly healthy check, metaphorically speaking. Obviously, he didn't take that to his grave because someone would have dug him up and pinched it. But he offered a lot of money to anyone who could claim to do something and could prove it that he couldn't as an atheist. And I would like to pose that question to our viewers on YouTube tonight on this podcast. If you've just joined us, last year we were called, and this was a fairly great name, I think, that Richard and I came up with, Beyond Belief, Making the Invisible Visible. And we changed it to an atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar, because I think that is classic. So have you got an idea? Do you believe you can come up with something? Have you got any evidence to prove, one, that God exists, and two, whether or not you think there's something that you can do as a believer that we can't do, or that I can't do as an atheist, and perhaps Suresh can't do either? Jump onto Facebook, YouTube, ask the question. It'll pop up on Richard's screen. I take it we haven't got any questions yet, Richard?
No questions yet.
Okay. So let me pose it to you, Richard. What do you think? Is there something that you can do as a Christian that I cannot as an atheist? I've got doozies for you tonight, mate. You've walked right into it. It's I know you love it.
I was trying to turn the tables on you a bit here. I was going to say, oh yeah, I can go to church every Sunday for 52 weeks in a row, but I don't think I can do this. I can't do it. So
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, I do know where that sort of challenge comes from, and it is against the toward the sort of, let's say, the less thoughtful members of my church Christian family who do see a very I don't know, a very low, no, I wouldn't say low view, but a low view of God, in the sense that he seems to be just one of us, bit more like Thor than the classical theist view of God, and sort of gives people sort of magic, supernatural powers to do things. Yeah, I don't think you can really make that claim. That is why Hitchens' check remained pretty much there, because
and I think that was the intent too, by the way. I think it's got, from my perspective, it's quite petty in that it's you can't necessarily prove it. It is an unprovable thing, I think. So I thought he just was doing it to expose the stupidity of some Christian people to believe that they have superior knowledge, power, or whatever over other people who don't, as if that's some kind of a superiority thing, and you can't be like me because I've got the power of God behind you. That may or may not be true, but yes,
that's a real ugly part of my tradition, to tell you the truth. And I think we've forgotten, like right one of the very first things that we read, where we came from, Genesis, the beginnings. Let us make mankind in our image. The Christian doctrine of the Imago Dei, or the image of God, is not restricted to Christians. It's the human thing. We are human. And yet I'm glad Hitchens pushed back on that, because it pushes back on that ugly part of my tradition, where it's, this splitting apart of the human race into people who can make mental assent to a list of things. I mean, it just seems absurd. It seems absurd. So I'm actually quite there with Hitchens. I'm only human. So yeah. it's good. However, there is a way of being Christian, and I guess there's a way of being Buddhist, probably a way of being all of the great religions of the world without falling into that trap. And I think that's probably a good thing.
I think Christianity, by and large, sets the bar incredibly high for people who just can't fulfill the expectations of people. And one of the great things I love about the unity of atheists, and please, if you're watching, it's not a group, it's not a religion, we don't go to a building and practice atheism. It's just simply to say I've not experienced or seen enough evidence to prove that God is real. That's pretty much the stance. And I think that one of the great things I see with the Sam Harris and the Hitchens and the Dawkins and all those they seem they're very one-dimensional in their attack on Christianity. And I kind of get that, because for them it is one-dimensional. And I understand that dimension and I share that view. But it also seems to be an incredible amount of non-judgmental unity between people. Like, it doesn't matter to us. We're not judging other atheists to see whether they dress as nice as we do if you go to a church. The competition in modern Christianity is just, talk about Bollywood, mate. It is just, it leaves it for dead. It is, having been in it for 25 years, never feeling comfortable in it, always thought, what the hell am I doing here? I have to go here because this is what you do when you become a part of the club and you join it, and your whole life becomes this insular, law-abiding, God-abiding, terrifying of being a bad person kind of thing. And I don't find that. I mean, to me, atheism, for want of another word even, is to me, it's freedom. I don't have to prove anything. I don't have to be called a sinner. I don't have to feel bad and dirty about myself. And I think that the religion, and certainly the Catholics have got they've had a field day with making their
they've put that one down to a fine art, haven't they?
And it even goes back to what Suresh was saying before about how they make their own, their own image. I mean, the Pope is, pretty much, God's representative on earth. And I mean, that is just
called the Vicar of Christ. Yes.
Yes, it's the complete antithesis of what the whole understanding about Hinduism and Buddhism is so far away from that. And Catholics, there's just money making. Oh, it's God! Don't get me started on it. It's bad. If you're Catholic and you're out there listening, I'm really sorry if you're offended, but you joined up. I didn't.
Oh, look, let me tell you just something that intersects with what Suresh was saying about the function of, how Hinduism especially and Buddhism function quite well in society. I actually, for want of a better word, converted from a real fundamentalist Baptist, separatist version of Christianity to a slightly less fundamentalist version of Pentecostal Christianity. And I was thinking about that the other day. Why did I do that? One of it is because it's a much more fun expression of Christianity than
very liberal,
hymns and you get to swing from the chandeliers, so at least it's more enjoyable. And I can do 52 weeks in a swing from the chandeliers Pentecostal church.
You had a church with chandeliers?
The first Pentecostal church I went to had chandeliers.
I was joking. Are you serious?
No, it really did. It was amazing. These two massive crystal chandeliers. It was an Italian Pentecostal church, so it was just it was amazing. But what attracted me to it was I was reading the stories of the beginnings of the modern Pentecostal movement, and it was amongst the abject poor, the ones who had no hope of bettering themselves in society, in the midst of a very racially divided America, end of the 1800s. There was this movement that was interracial, that lifted up women as clergy and took those found in poverty by storm, this idea that there's something more than this awful world that they're experiencing day to day. And it gave them that hope. It gave them a way of being in the world. And it did have a positive effect on people in those societies of having something to solidify them, to empower them, to teach them to be good people, to look after each other, you know, the least of these, all of that stuff. That really attracted me to the Pentecostal movement. What caused me to have a absolute crisis of faith is the same kinds of the great grandchildren of those people have turned Pentecostalism into for some of them, into a big Sunday show that makes a lot of money, that you've got to, only the beautiful people get to be seen. There's not a poverty-stricken homeless person in the building, and yet it's got the same name. And I'm like, these are almost two different religions. They're both called Christianity, but how can they be the same thing when a person from the turn of the century Pentecostalism wouldn't have been even allowed in the church that we went to? It's like, how is that the same thing? And so Christianity isn't Christianity. There has to be common things about it, but there's big portions of your critique of the church and Christianity that I'm right on board with. And my rational thinking, my moral intuition, my experience of the world, like Suresh said, you know, when you travel outside of your own little bubble, a lot of the things just don't hold water. Some of the beliefs that work really well in the church, middle upper class church of all white people, singing the same songs, believing the same things. You go to India, a whole lot of things that are easy to think is true in that little building cannot be true when you're standing on the streets of India or standing on the streets of South Africa. So yeah, very, very interesting. If nothing else, this whole sort of thinking about the convenience of geography should be one of those tests that we bring to our beliefs, whether religious, theistic, atheistic or not. Even just some of the ways we view economics, society, multiculturalism, all that sort of stuff. It's a really good test, I think.
I look forward to sort of make it a goal, but I get excited, having been involved in it for so long, so 25 years of my life, and I'm only 30, so, you know, that was... Thank you for laughing.
Must have been
so
a real
fervently,
rough 25 years, Suresh.
It's a waste.
Actually, what's really scary is I'm 2 years older than Suresh, so there you go.
Right.
1957, I was born. You were born in 59. But one of the things I look forward to, which I've found in my life, is unlocking. I believe that every single person, once given the logical understanding of what we're talking about here, this the God who has decided for some unknown reason to never present himself, and relying totally talk about putting the ball back in your other person's court, 100% on you to try and convince yourself through the mechanism of faith that God is real. I think that's an incredible achievement to be able to buy that. It was easy for me because I had an incredibly dramatic conversion. My life had completely fallen apart. I'd lost everything. I had a tumor on my vocal cords where I was told I would never talk again, let alone sing. That was the end of my band. I was in a big band in Perth, going places, doing things. So my life sucked. Everything had gone. Now I had a stereo to show after 30 years on this planet. I needed something. And whether it was coincidence or divine intervention or whatever, something came along which enabled me to get on board that train and take it. And it was just, wow. So my life went from absolute crap to amazing. Everything amazing. Look at me. God loves me. I'm something. I'm someone. I'm cared for. Everything else sucked in my life. And now I've got this. So that's easy. And it wasn't easy to get out of that because that became my life for 25 years. So I can sit here now and going, I honestly believe if I can walk away from that because I just simply cannot force myself to believe what I just simply don't believe. It's like I insist that you believe that I've got frogs in my garden that talk. No matter how much I convince you that they're there, you would never, ever be able to say, okay, you know what? Damn it, I'm going to believe that because you'd be a nut. So I can't do that anymore. I want to find a key that unlocks the heart of people so that they can experience the freedom that I have because there is a sense of being locked into something which isn't yours. It's controlling. It's vague. It doesn't do what it says it's going to do. And we talked about this, Suresh, last week. We talked with Richard and Luke very much of took me back to the beginnings of Christianity and understanding that if it says in Matthew that God, ask God for everything and He will make your prayers come true. That, according to what they're talking about, and I'm not buying that yet 100% anyway, that's not what the prayer was meant to be about. That's not who God is. And modern Christianity has kind of lost that direction. But I just think that there is a key, and I think Richard's probably about 2 or 3 sermons away from going, you know what? I mean, he is the most open Christian I've ever met in my life, who's quite willing to say, look, there's just so much that doesn't make sense, and there's so much when we talk about what does make sense. And I look forward to enjoying that unlocking the key. Not because I'm trying to convert people. I'm not, just nothing involved in converting.
You're converting to what?
Exactly. It's about saying, look, this is what happened to me. It's real. It's amazing. And if you're in a family situation and you don't want to get out of going to church or being because you're the pressure in your family and families turn against people and people are ostracized by their families because they turn their backs on God, give us a comment or a question or whatever on YouTube and let's talk about it because it's helpful. It really is.
I was just going to say, Suresh, I'd like to hear your perspective on this piece here.
Yeah, I'm just going to add something to what you said earlier there, Richard, about the almost 2 faiths and having that ostentatious, I guess, in the church, in the Catholic Church tradition and the general Christian churches. I've always found it very difficult to come to terms with the juxtaposition of this incredibly ornate Hindu temple with the poverty that exists on the streets of India. And that was something that I struggled with forever. And I remember visiting Mother Teresa's ashram at one point just to see the work that she was doing there. And it was quite incredible to, the simplicity of everything that was done there just struck me as being the true faith. This was what was prescribed in religion, dictated to by the religious texts, etc. It's about helping everyone out there who needed a hand, rather than build this further monument to me or to whoever. And that just, and look, India has more godmen than any other country in the world. Every second person has just set themselves up as a god. There's Sai Baba, there's all these different, absolute charlatans who claim to be God and then build a whole following, the Maharishi, all of those people. But to me, all it does is just prey on aspects of our life and aspects of our weaknesses in our psyche that are exploited by that structure, that establishment, so that I become a person who's a contributor. And I have never been able to come to terms with that. And once you build, and particularly India, which has got these so many religions at such high levels of participation, you have the Hindus building one temple, and all of a sudden the Muslims have to build a mosque that's slightly larger. And then the Baha'is come along, and so on and so forth and so forth. So it just, that's the aspects of religion that I've always found very hard to come to terms with, and never something that I could understand. And it's one of the other reasons why I've been rather proud, like you, Pete, of being a person who does not believe any of that, and prefers to regard myself as the person who will determine my future rather than someone up there.
Yeah, I find it disturbing when I drive past a Sikh temple and every car in there is a Mercedes and everyone is just beautiful. And look, that may be a generalization, but certainly that's how I view these outlandish temples. For what purpose? For they trying to appease their god by having, gold plated, stuff around the. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
And I also found, I attended various, right next door to my dad's home in this little village in India. There was a Hindu ceremony going on there, and I think I was probably about 11 or 12, and we wandered across next door to witness this ceremony. It was a Hindu ceremony, and the man was, it's what we call in our part of India, we call that particular person a Velchapad. And what this Velchapad does is he places himself in a trance because of the drumming of all of the drums that are going on, the beat of the drums and all of that. And he's in this massive trance. And at some point, he starts to offer to the gods there, the various idols and the icons there, his own blood as part of his offering. And the way he draws that blood is he takes the sword and he hits it against the top of his head until blood's pouring out of it. At the age of 11, I'm sitting here looking at this and thinking, this is just sick. This is horrible. But
yeah.
it was, and yet, I mean, he would have had the worst headache the next day. But the reality was that he actually did. He was in such a trance that he did not actually feel the pain. Supposedly. Then they walk on you've seen in Malaysia and India and so on, they walk on fire.
Yeah.
The coals, and I think, wow, why place yourself in that position? Why do all of those things? Are you a better person as a result of that? Yeah, no.
Do you think it's a case of mind over matter, or are you open to the possibility? I'm not saying I am, but of it being a spiritual episode, like if someone's actually going into a trance? What do you think that is?
I'm not sure. I think that you can look, and it is highly likely also that he was probably smoking a few things before he arrived there. So, which was not an unusual circumstance in some of the Hindu temples.
I was alluding to that, yes.
Yes. So they. Which is what made it also very attractive to the Western philosopher, the culture. Everyone came there for that particular purpose. But I found, I'm not sure. And there were times when I saw these people work themselves into this frenzy. Now, having been the CEO of Epilepsy WA, I knew that they were actually having an epileptic seizure, nothing else. But
oh wow, jeez.
To me, I could see all the signs of an epileptic seizure, but to them it was somehow transcending to a level that was communicating with a higher being. No, someone having a seizure.
It's what people want to believe, isn't it? I mean, it's so much a part of faith and belief. It's the I want to believe in belief, and I will do everything in my power to convince myself that it's right. I will use faith as a mechanism instead of facts and evidence, and I want to believe. And the mind is an incredibly powerful thing. We can convince ourselves of everything. We can have a psychosomatic illness in about 5 minutes. I know what that's like. I used to be like that. If I saw something on TV or heard on the radio, these are the symptoms of blah, 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 but in half an hour I'd have it.
Oh, no. And
it felt real. And it was very much psychosomatic, but it actually was a real experience. Mm-hmm. And we well, not that I wanted to believe it, but that's the mechanism in my mind that convinced me that it was true. But we want, and religion is incredibly powerful. Who doesn't want to believe there can be afterlife. I know some people don't want to believe it, but I mean, what an incredible thing to be able to see all your relatives who have died, your favourite auntie or whatever, and that you can have that at your fingertips just by believing in something, and you convince yourself that it's true and it's real. I did it for ages. I was convinced of life after death. Now I'm convinced that you die and your vegetation. That's all I can think. And I don't want to think that that's real necessarily. I have no choice but to think, well, as an intelligent, logical human being, that's the only thing that makes sense to me right now. Everything else is wrapped up in belief and faith and a desire to want things to happen that aren't necessarily a part of the human experience. I'm an evolving human being, and it looks to me like I'm a part of a chaotic world that has no God in it.
Mm. 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 Yeah. And you know, look, some of the coexistence of all these religions in places like India also provides this incredible tension between the religions, which also leads me to that position of saying, why do I want to be a part of something that actually has this competition between myself and a fellow human being as to whose religion is better? You know, I've actually witnessed. I think I was about 14. We jumped over the wall of the boarding school and went out in the middle of the night, wandering around the city and in Bangalore. And we happened to come up to a mosque, and there were very, very early morning prayers that were going on there. There were a whole lot of young Muslim men doing their prayer rites there that morning, and a bunch of young yobos who happened to be of Hindu faith coming along, and we were just standing there watching this whole thing go on. The young Hindus then came close to the mosque and suddenly released this baby pig into the mosque. And we literally just stood there absolutely transfixed as those boys came out and started slaughtering these Hindu boys right before our eyes. And we're thinking, in the name of religion.
Mm.
You know, I just could not come to terms with all of that. You know, so and those were the sort of influences that, as a child, I was 14, 15 years old at that time, and then but then it tested my faith, and what you guys were saying earlier about this, you know, when you get to that, and Pete, you talked in terms of a psychosomatic illness, but 12 years ago, when I had my challenges of health, when I went through that 3-week period when I had the heart attack, quadruple bypass, discovery of a cancer, removal of my stomach, all in that 3-week period, I remember that there were Christian churches all around Australia that were saying prayers for me. There were Hindu temples all around the world that were saying prayers. There were mosques around the place. There were synagogues. There was a church in Zimbabwe that rang me to ask me what time the operation was because they wanted to say a prayer for me. The Buddhists went out and said prayers for me, all because I'd done work to sustain all of their religions in my role as president of the Ethnic Communities Council. So I'd done all of that work around the religious aspects of all that. Now, when I went through that whole period of that health journey, being written off and told I had 6 months to live and then surviving, it really questioned whether or not I was right in walking away from all that faith when I had all these faiths actually working for me, supposedly, or saying prayers for me. And I thought about it very, very briefly at that point, and I said, look, it was actually probably sheer determination on my part that got me through that, rather than anything that happened in a religious institution of any kind anywhere in the world. So it convinced me even more that I was the determinant of my future fate rather than anyone else, because I started to turn things around, exercising, walking, doing
Yeah.
all things that I should have been doing before I got sick.
Yeah.
Uh,
We
and
talked about that last week. We talked a lot about prayer and the power of it, and quoting from a huge study which actually was performed in India in 2009.
Oh yeah.
And how they put all of these different people in groups so that they didn't know they were actually being prayed for. And long story short, the analysis was at the end of people being treated for all sorts of blood diseases and cancers and all sorts of stuff, that there was you couldn't actually you couldn't, what's the word I'm looking for? You couldn't actually come up with a result because of the influences outside of that, like what you're talking about. That the one group of people that did notice a big improvement was women who were trying to get pregnant through IVF.
Yes.
And Richard and Luke have talked about how just a positive result to know all of these people around the world that were praying for you doesn't mean that their prayers helped, but it probably made you feel so determined to reward them and in looking after yourself, and that's the byproduct of it. I mean, who knows? But what the result from all the tests were, of course, there was no change in the result of any of the people who had legitimate diseases and sicknesses. So, as you would expect, I guess, from that.
There's a book written by a chap named Abraham Kabul, who is from the same part of India that I'm from Kerala. And he goes through and dispels the Godmen of India. And what he's done, he spent his life just destroying all of these arguments that were put up. And the reason he does that is that at a very young age, he was going to boarding school up in Benares, which is the holy city for the Hindus. And he was going from South India all the way to the north every term, and then he'd come back at the end of the term and spend the time with his parents. Now, everyone from his village, particularly women who were looking to fall pregnant, would come to him with the little vials so that he could go to Benares and fill it with the water of the Ganges River. And so he would go swimming in the river, filling up these vials and bring them back. And one time he's in the water, and he's probably only about 14 or 15 years old. And as he's gone to take a paddle, and he's just moved his hand, and he suddenly grasped the dismembered hand of one of the corpses that had been thrown in the river. And he suddenly realized, it dawned on him that this is the river where the Hindus come and deposit the dead bodies of their relatives. This is the same river that he was filling these vials up with water to bring back holy water to his family and to his relatives. At that point, he ceased filling those vials there, but he used to go to the railway station and fill it from the taps there. And the number of women that fell pregnant after that point was enormous.
Oh, wow. What's the moral of that story?
But the holy water is actually at the railway station.
That's right.
Obviously.
Which may have been drained or taken from the Ganges, of course.
Yeah.
The dead cattle floating upside down, and people
yes.
bathing in it. It's always freaked me out. I mean, if I went there, maybe not so much rest, but if you and I went there, there's one drop of that water, we would be as sick as a dog for so long.
So yes, it's amazing what you want to believe, and that psychosomatic stuff that you were talking about earlier, Pete. It does wonders to us, isn't it? It's just preys on your mind, and you decide you're going to make a better person of yourself.
Yeah. I think that's what one of the great joys of stepping away from a lot of people don't experience being involved in a worldwide connection in a group like that. It's incredibly powerful. And it's not something that everyone experiences in their life. They might go through their entire life never doing it. And I'm not recommending that you do. I'm just saying that was something I went through, and it's huge. It becomes a part of you, so much so. It's indelibly stamped in your heart, and you can't unlearn it or unexperience it. And I'm glad I did. But I also think there's an enormous amount of freedom in believing more. One of the things I dislike most about faith in Christianity is the need for your reliance on God. Your abilities are really downplayed. Everything that you do that's good or clever or smart or whatever is automatically credited to God, and you're really nothing without God, which is bizarre because I no longer believe in God, and yet I'm the same person I was before. What do you know about that? Nothing's transpired. I still do what I do, except it's me now doing it and not giving all the credit to God.
It's again, also just touching on that, that cathartic event that can actually take you away from religion can also bring you back to religion. I observed that with my dad, for example, devout as a youngster, went through life very much a rationalist, aged 58, diagnosed with lung cancer, given 6 months to live, suddenly embraced Hinduism again and started to believe and started to pray and do all of those things. Reality is he survived another 11 years despite being given 6 months to live. He would always put that down to, he would have always put that down to his embracing of the faith again. And this comes back to that point we were making earlier, that what is it that religion gives you that others may not do? It's more than religion. I think it's actually belief that gives you that solace.
Yeah.
Yes.
Religion just puts a structure around that belief, but a particular different type of structure in each case. But it is that belief. What we rely on, I suppose, Richard, for Peter and I rely on, is belief in ourselves and belief in our own abilities and our body's abilities to recover and to do those things without that need for the structure of religion around it. That's my position on that. That's certainly the way I would view it. Yeah.
Which is one of the things I've been talking about a lot through this series, which is the 4th episode we're up to, is the ability to be comfortable about what you can and can't do. And I mean, I used to say, "Well, it's not me; it's God that's made me this way." And and I think that I have no problem too, by the way, with people thinking that their sudden re-engagement with Hinduism helped him get better. It doesn't matter to me. I'm over the moon that he managed to live long. I don't care what happened. If it was God doing it, absolutely bring it on. My whole quest has always been to find the evidence. That's all I'm looking for. I find it staggering that the Bible's full of encounters with God, and yet for the next 2,000 odd years, there's just total silence. I don't understand.
Yeah.
If God wants me to believe in him, he's the one that would know more than anything what it would take to convince me. But for some reason, it's not. I don't know. It doesn't. I can't understand why God would be so silent and expecting so much of us to live without that knowledge. I tip my hat to anyone who can actually still believe in it with zero evidence. I think it's just, which I go back to Neil deGrasse Tyson again. I mean, but that he said in the beginning. Now that's a very different thing, because Richard and Luke also challenged me on the fact that Tyson said that God is all powerful and all loving, and these guys are not convinced that that's what God has ever claimed. That it's something that we've labelled and not necessarily. So that's a whole different thing.
Well, Luke more than me, but yeah, I mean, there's the three horns of that dilemma, which is a all-powerful God, an all-loving God, and evil in the world. You've got to get rid of one of them somehow. You know what I mean? In some way, or blunt the horn somehow. That's just how the logic of that works. Luke goes one way. I tend to go I won't discuss it now because we don't have another 4 hours. But enough to say that I am very sympathetic with people who are faced with the awful reality of this world, concluding there can't be a God like that. I'm thinking, well, that shows, first of all, an ability to think through the situation, to feel the situation, to not, sacrifice the difficult job of rational thought and making your way in the world as a rational agent. And if that's the conclusion you come with, I wholly appreciate that. And I sometimes genuinely wonder if I'm not that way because I haven't had a sufficiently traumatic event. It very well could be. Although I've had traumatic enough events, and I do have a heightened sense of empathy for the world around me, in the sense that hearing the stories is quite traumatic for me, to the point, for the last maybe 20 years, I have not listened to the news. It's an awful experience for me. Awful experience. I can't do it. Although I've come to slightly
it ranks against your belief, or is that what you mean? That you don't want to believe that this is a world that God rules?
No, about not watching the news, you mean?
Yes.
I know, it's just because it's actually just knowing, being involved in the stories that hurt. It's like it's very troubling to me personally. It's got very little intersection with what I believe about the situation. It's actually quite difficult to constantly live in a place where you're going from one, I guess, secondhand trauma to the next. I think
that's very wise. I think that's a great deal of wisdom, because we all, stuff comes up on YouTube and it's like, wow, this is going to be horrific. And I watch it. The power of voyeurism, even though you know the result is not good for your psyche, it's not good for your mind, it's not good for your heart, it's not good for anything. You don't need to know that stuff. And good on you for making the tough decision to not, well, assuming it was a tough decision, to not watch it. I mean, I think we would all be much better off if we stopped. I've got an anxiety disorder. This does not help.
I hear you, mate.
God. I suffer from it every day, but the pull to watch it is just extraordinarily powerful. Such as the world in which we live. There's a sense of, if you watch this, you will be rewarded. You will experience something that you've never seen before. Yes, that's true, but at what cost? Suresh and I are around the same age, and we grew up with, my goodness, life was so unbelievably simple. It was just, I know you're mid-40s now, Rich, so you've experienced that as well.
Yeah, Gen X. So I was in the transition. I'm the forgotten transition generation.
Yeah, don't try and push yourself into our category, mate.
No.
We've helped destroy the world. That's what are we called?
Thanks, boomers.
Boomers, that's right. Yeah, good on you. My kids now, when I say something stupid, they go, "Oh, yeah, good on you, boomer."
Yeah, I hear you. But I was just reflecting on that. That kind of information that comes in drains me, hurts me. This kind of conversation that challenges my beliefs, challenges, it sharpens the way I think about the world and see the world, and enriches me. I find I can do this all night and not be weary from it. It's a very energizing experience. And I think there's something incredibly significant around hearing each other's stories. It stops us having the awful privilege of seeing the world only through our own eyes, and seeing it through somebody else's eyes gives us a greater way of being human. So that's got to be a good part of anybody's way of being in the world, I think.
It's very empowering. I mean, I didn't know how empowering it was going to be, but I mean, you're talking to the likes of you guys, and you know, we kind of get to the stage in our lives where we think we've got I'm pretty well set about what I think and what I believe, what I know, and I'm open to any kind of change, but not too much, because that's just a pain and it takes
too hard to do all that again, isn't
it is. But then you feel empowered. You go, hang on a minute. I sit down with Lou afterwards and go, do you know what Rick said the other night, and I didn't think about before? Or it's fantastic. This is what I hoped would come about by starting this podcast series. That you hear about amazing stuff that, you know, anyone listening or watching tonight who thought this was fascinating. So do we. What we're hearing from Suresh in his life, it's enriching and it's fantastic. And it makes me think about, you know, having a screen full of 50 people all telling their stories on the one night would be amazing, but not very manageable. But yeah, look, it's terrific. Look, we did start a little bit late. Do we want to go a few more minutes over, or?
I'd like to hear if Suresh has got any last thoughts that have cropped up, since, you know, we've got endless time to jabber on at each other. I'd really see if there's anything at all that's sort of come across that you think, yeah, I think I should really say that tonight.
Look, I was fascinated by what you were saying there in regard to the news and the triggering of emotions. I do a lot of work. I've done a lot of work in recent times in the health advocacy space. And what I've found in that space is really incredibly triggering, because I'm living the imperfect health outcome that the parents have come to see me about, or the husbands come to see me about the wife's inappropriate health treatment, the bad outcome. And I found in more recent times that, like, you know, when I was dealing with Aishwarya's death, the little 7-year-old, I actually start to be so emotionally involved with the family that I think that that's a space that I still need a lot of work to debrief myself from that position. I think those people who, like yourself, have religion or faith to turn to really have a fantastic coping mechanism. You know, that's a really a brilliant coping mechanism. Now, I see that when I deal with people who work in the refugee space, when I deal with people who are refugees, I look at how they deal with the dire circumstances. A significant number of them go to their faith for that solace, and I find that is very empowering to me, to know that I will fight their right to follow that and to observe that right till the last breath in my body. But I don't want that. You know, I don't want it for myself, but I want it for everyone else. I want it for everyone who finds solace with it. You know, so I think I'm not sure that the the atheist tag necessarily captures that. That's why I always insist that I'm not an anti-theist, because if religion works for you, Richard, I will fight till the last breath of my body to ensure that you will be allowed to practice your religion as you see fit. So that, yeah, that's where, and I think if there were more advocates who were able to disassociate themselves from anti-theism and simply concentrate on their own lack of belief as being their guiding principle, we would have less arguments and less fights amongst the groups, and we'd all get along a lot easier, I think. So,
Yeah, that's right. And I
That
think
is true to a degree, but this is what's brought us all together.
yes, that's true. That's true.
So I mean, and look, totally admirable what you're saying. I mean, no one can argue with that. I mean, who doesn't want that kind of respect and honour bestowed upon someone? But I think and we've been very careful to respectfully talk to each other. I've probably lost my shit a couple of times and got a bit angry and frustrated. That's when you're working with guys who are kind of more about the philosophical arguments, if you like. So, but we're working our way through it. They will eventually succumb to my brilliance, and they will,
maybe. I will not foreclose on any possibility.
No, look, and likewise. I mean, I'm an open book. If I didn't care about what other people thought, and the desire to share one's experience in the hope that it somehow empowers or whatever, then I wouldn't bother doing it. But I think it's after all of those years of involved, I think it's exciting to be able to discuss it, and hopefully, Suresh, we can see you again. We'll talk about that off camera to whether or not you're interested in being a part of it. I would have to ask you to get your Wi-Fi sorted out if possible, because it's the amount of lag is quite either that or you're on some of that funny stuff that you were talking about before.
No, I've managed to get rid of all of the other open pages, and that's why it's hopefully a little more stable now.
Okay. Fabulous. All right, guys, look, should we wrap it up there?
Yeah, that was a fantastic discussion, and I really appreciate Suresh's insight, his stories, his willingness to really share from the experiences he's had, and give us really, a really unique way of being atheist in the midst of a people of great faith, and showing that being human is sort of at the top of the list. And I think that's probably one of the things that really bind us all as fellas in the podcast together, is there's a hierarchy of values, and people, for each of us, is at the top. So it's really interesting. Thank you for sharing, mate.
Oh, very happy. Thank you very much. And happy to join up at any time you want me to. No, not a problem at all.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Thank you, mate. I enjoy looking at beautiful qualities of other people that I don't have.
Yeah.
Sadly, none of you have in those. No, I'm joking. No, but I do. I admire people more as I get older, thinking, okay, that's a really nice quality. I don't have that. Yeah. That makes this person calm, and I'm not. And how do I get hold of that? And it's fabulous. It's the depth of this is so much more than what I had anticipated was going to come about by it. So thank you guys so much for the input and make it happen. Richard, thank you so much for all the graphics and everything. It's just wow, you made it look amazing. So if you've been watching tonight, thank you so much. If you've been watching on YouTube, and the next time you see this is really messes with my brain. You could be watching a repeat. but we don't know, and it doesn't matter. It's just very, it really messes with my brain every time I go to talk about this. If you're watching it live now, but you're watching a repeat, saying it's live now doesn't make any sense, and the repeat may not be a repeat. That might be live. So,
we know what you repeat.
well, I'm glad you do. So, thank you so much. Looking forward to you joining us next Wednesday. What will be the date next Wednesday? I've got no idea. What's the date? It's the 3rd today, isn't it? The 9th. Is it not the 9th next Wednesday?
10th.
Is it 10th? Of course, it's the 7th. Okay, maths was never my strong point.
The seventh day God rested. That's why there's 7 days in the week. I'm just saying.
Oh, just before you go, I heard a very interesting thing today, which also, of course, was Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's just did you know there's no zeros in Roman numerals?
Mm.
There is not a zero because they hadn't been invented.
No.
And how they came about was extraordinary. It's a great story. But anyway, I digress. There's nothing to do with what we're talking about. An atheist and a believer and a pastor walk into a bar. That is what you've been watching and listening to tonight. Thank you so much for your company. Look forward to doing it again. Same time next Wednesday. Thank you very much, Suresh, and thanks, Richard. I don't know whether we've got Luke back next week. We'll see how we go. We'll talk to you again, Suresh. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Good night, world.